Hey, what's going on, everyone? Greg here, and maybe you can help me out with something. I got a question for you. Where is the rest of the Apple Silicon Mac lineup? We were promised a lot of Macs at this last Apple March event, and don't get me wrong, I am very happy with what Apple announced with the new Mac Studio and the new Studio display, and especially with their new Apple Silicon chip, the M1 Ultra chip. But there were a lot of Macs conspicuously missing at this event. Macs that were long rumored and supposed to be at this event, like a Pro version of the Mac Mini, an M2 MacBook Pro, and even the 27-inch iMac, which, strangely enough, maybe a little bit kind of forebodingly, is now discontinued on Apple's website. So where are the rest of these Apple Silicon Macs? When can we expect them? Or can we even expect them at this point? So one Mac I want to just get off right off the bat that we kind of know is coming is because Apple basically told us it is coming, is a new Mac Pro. Now, Apple obviously announced the Mac Studio, and I think when people first saw this being announced at the event, I think a lot of us were wondering, is this the new Mac Pro? Is this what's replacing the Mac Pro? It basically sounded like the rumors we were hearing for a while of a new half-size Mac Pro, and just going through this event, we're going, okay, maybe this is the new Mac Pro. It has a new M1 Ultra chip in it. It's super powerful. But Apple at the event, I guess maybe to kind of dispel people's fears and letting us know that this actually isn't the peak of performance with this Mac Studio, basically came out and said, we have one computer left to transition over to Apple Silicon, and that would complete the entire Apple Silicon transition, and that would be, of course, the Mac Pro. So they came out on stage, and I guess that's kind of rare for Apple to actually confirm the existence of a product they're working on. Obviously, they told us they would bring their entire lineup to Apple Silicon, so maybe we shouldn't be too surprised about that. But they said, don't worry, we are basically still working on the Mac Pro. It's still coming, and it's going to be even more powerful than the Mac Studio, I'm guessing. So that's still coming. As for when we can expect that, I think the most obvious would be WWDC. That should take place sometime in June. That's only actually a few months away at this point. And while I think we'll see it at June, I think it'll be very much a sneak peek or a peek at the performance, not like the Mac Studio, which is actually coming out very soon. But the Mac Pro will probably be announced at WWDC, and then we'll probably get it shipped probably towards the end of the year, I'm guessing. I'm guessing it's going to be like when Apple announced the Intel Mac Pro, and they announced it at WWDC, and it really wasn't ready to ship to customers until December. Okay, what about other Macs? Well, before the event, I was going through the rumor mill and telling all of you to expect a new Mac Mini Pro, a Pro version of the Mac Mini. And while I think a lot of us can look at the Mac Studio and see that it's basically a bigger version of the Mac Mini with more powerful chips, and we can kind of say maybe that was the Pro version of the Mac Mini that Apple was planning, it doesn't really seem to line up with the rumors that John Prosser gave us talking about a redesigned Mac Mini that was going to get smaller and flatter and feature a plexiglass top. So I don't think this is the new Mac Mini, this Mac Studio. I think it's just an entirely new Mac in Apple's lineup. Obviously, they still sell the M1 Mac Mini as an entry-level computer, but the strange thing is, they still sell the Intel version of the Mac Mini, that space gray one that was kind of supposed to be the Pro Mac Mini in the lineup, even though they didn't call it a Pro Mac Mini. So the fact that Apple is still selling that Intel version of the Mac Mini means there must still be a replacement coming for it, or more than likely still a replacement coming from it. 9to5Mac actually reported on that Apple basically at the last second, or whatever time frame they were doing the production of the Mac Studio, their initial plans were to make a Mac Mini Pro with an M1 Pro and an M1 Max chip, but basically they scrapped that idea and went for the Mac Studio instead, probably because with that Mac Mini form factor, the best chip they could probably fit in it was something like the M1 Max chip, and with the Mac Studio, they wanted to go one step further with this new M1 Ultra chip. So I'm sure they had, both computers in development. They looked at the Mac Studio. They went, this is more powerful. This is basically the Pro Mac Mini that people really want for a Pro Mac desktop that's in between a Mac Mini and in between a Mac Pro. and they probably went with that. And really at that point, it wouldn't make sense to announce a new Pro Mac Mini alongside of it because the Mac Studio is kind of better in every way. However, 9 to 5 Mac says that Apple is still working on a Mac Mini. Now, they've kind of changed their strategy here, and I'm guessing that redesigned rumor is still true, but this is going to be launching later with the M2 chip. We are expecting a new entry-level M2 Mac Mini, and then with that, we're also going to get additional chip options that would make it more powerful, kind of make it like a Mac Mini Pro. But that chip, apparently right now, is only going to go up to the M2 Pro. So you have the M1 and the M1 Pro. With this new Mac Mini, when the new chips come out, it is going to receive the M2 chip at the entry level, and then you're going to be able to spec it up to an M2 Pro. And I think that sounds like the right pricing strategy right now with this Mac Studio being in existence, because if Apple decided to go all out and introduce an M2 Max Mac Mini, I just feel like it would just rub right up against the price point of the Mac Studio. And at that point, why get the Mac Mini when you can get the Mac Studio, which is probably going to have better cooling and more ports? I feel like an M2 Max version of the Mac Mini would be very close to $2,000. So a very needless product in the lineup, but putting a Pro chip in there, getting it priced under $2,000, that would make sense. And then you can boost the Mac Mini's capabilities pretty well. So I'm guessing the M2 Mac Mini would probably have that great entry-level price of around $699, still be an amazing value. And then you'll be able to spec up the chip inside of that, maybe get that M2 Pro Mac Mini for still under $1,000. And that actually might make that a really, really compelling desktop option. And then when that comes out, I'm guessing that's the official death of the Intel Mac Mini. Finally, that thing needs to go. That is the worst Mac that Apple sells. Do not buy that space gray Intel Mac Mini. You will be very sorry. Okay, what about those last minute rumors of an M2 MacBook Pro? Well, when I initially reported on that rumor, I told you the source came from DigiTimes, and I told you that they have been very inaccurate in the past. And the idea of the M2 chip coming out now, and the fact that it would be introduced into an M2 MacBook Pro that was rumored to have the same exact design as the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro made absolutely no sense to me. Why would Apple take their new Apple Silicon chip, one that's supposed to be in new computers like a redesigned MacBook Air, why would they take that chip and introduce it in probably one of the most boring product designs that they have going right now, an M2 MacBook Air complete with a touch bar, introduce it at this event right now? Made no sense to me. So I highly, highly, highly doubt it that we would get an M2 MacBook Pro. Looks like my suspicions were correct. There was no M2 MacBook Pro, but again, we still are expecting one. So the rumors still seem to indicate that this M2 MacBook Pro would be the same design as the 13-inch model we have now, and it would still retain the touch bar. One new thing that we have learned from 9 to 5 Mac is apparently, even though that's the current plan, what Apple may decide to do, and this would maybe make a little bit more sense, I still hope they kind of drop the touch bar because it would bring more cohesion into the lineup, but what they're planning to do besides refreshing it with an M2 chip would be to rebrand it. Not call it a MacBook Pro anymore, just call it a MacBook. And I think that would make a lot more sense. You take the 13-inch design, strip out the touch bar, put a function key row in there, keep the same design, put the M2 chip in it, give it a power boost, keep the fan inside of it, have it have better performance than the MacBook Air, sit in between though the MacBook Air and the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, and just call it a MacBook. That would eliminate all confusion from this product. You know the MacBook Pros are those higher end ones. You know the MacBook is right there in the middle, and then you have the MacBook Air at the end of the lineup being the lightest and slimmest laptop that you can get. And I just think that would just make so much more sense in the lineup. And speaking of that M2 MacBook Air, that is something we are still expecting. All these M2 Macs, I guess, are launching at the end of the year, and they're going to be showcased along with that M2 MacBook Air refresh. And the rumors for that are pretty much unchanged. The M2 MacBook Air is going to get slimmer and lighter, going to be introduced in a bunch of new colors, and it might even feature things like a mini LED display. But unfortunately, it does sound like the rumors of it getting a price increase are still pretty true. Those mini LED display components seem to be pretty costly for Apple to manufacture, and when they introduce that on any of their new products, they all received a price hike along with it. So M2 MacBook Pro, M2 MacBook Air, still supposed to be out. I'm guessing towards the end of the year. I'm guessing we'll get the iPhone 14 event in September, and then after that, we'll have another Apple Mac event for the M2 in October or November. Get the M2 Mac Mini, M2 MacBook Pro, M2 MacBook Air, call it a day. Oh, and the M2 iMac. M2 iMac also coming. No concrete rumors on that, but yeah, they need to update the M2 inside of the iMac. And that's good enough. It's a spec bump. It already received a redesign. There's nothing really crazy to expect there. But speaking of iMacs, what about the bigger 27-inch iMac? This is something I've been reporting on for a while, and I almost feel bad for it because I am now called into question whether any of those rumors were accurate. And I say that because one of the most accurate sources when it came to display panels was Ross Young. And he's been detailing about a new 27-inch display coming that was supposed to be for an iMac. But we didn't get an iMac at this March 8th event. What we got was a 27-inch studio display that we heard nothing about until the last possible minute. And what I think happened is because Ross Young is based in the supply chain. All of his leaks are coming from display panel leaks. He saw a 27-inch display and he assumed, hey, that's a new iMac coming out. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't, Ross. It was a new display. And the crazier part is when Apple introduced the Mac Studio along with the Studio display, they said, this combination is a great replacement for users who loved our 27-inch iMac. It very much reminded me of the time when Apple came out with the first MacBook Pro and they introduced that lower-end MacBook Pro with the function key row, and they said, this is a great replacement for users who love the MacBook Air and who want a Retina display. Well, the 27-inch iMac being discontinued on Apple's website basically sounds like the 27-inch iMac is dead and it is never coming back. At least for now, I think. I think there's a strong possibility we will eventually get a bigger iMac. I don't know what form that looks like, though. Is the new 27 or 30-inch iMac or whatever it turns out to be when it comes out, is that just a bigger version of the M1 or future M2 iMac and there's no Pro chips inside of it? Is it something like that M2 Mac Mini Pro that we heard about where, you know, you'll get a 27-inch iMac along with this 24-inch, but the max chip spec you'll be able to do with that computer is the M2 Pro chip? And for those of us who wanted a beefy iMac with an M1 Max or dare I say an M1 Ultra chip, is that just not on the table at this moment? Because when you think about the original iMac, that was introduced as the consumer level Mac, the all-in-one Mac that you buy. It was never initially pitched for a pro audience. It was a very consumer level product. And what we've seen out of Apple's Mac product strategy these past few years is a return to that kind of classic 4-grid quadrant of Mac selling where, the 2013 to 2020 era was very hazy on what Macs you were supposed to buy if you were a pro customer or a consumer customer. These Macs were blurring into other product categories. And even though the iMac was initially introduced as a consumer level computer, especially when Apple kind of messed up that 2013 Mac Pro and they didn't really update it for a while, what pros or prosumers were basically doing, power users, they were going for those bigger 27-inch iMacs and outfitting them with the top specs. And I think Apple kind of saw that in their sales data, and they even questioned if they really needed a dedicated Mac Pro desktop anymore. So that's why we saw designs like the iMac Pro come out, where you had a iMac with a Xeon chip inside of it all of a sudden, a pro-level desktop all-in-one. But then I quickly think they realized that probably wasn't the solution they wanted to go with. They were very constrained in that iMac form factor, even fitting in those powerful chips, even though they did a great job with the iMac Pro. Maybe that's where they kind of went, what we're making here isn't necessarily what our pro customers want. They want choice, they want flexibility, they want expandability. And the idea of an all-in-one is really something more that a consumer's going to buy. They're going to buy an all-in-one. They're going to be happy with the performance, especially on these new Apple Silicon chips. They're never going to want to upgrade it or do anything like that. And even though you can't upgrade something like the Mac Studio, it's very expandable with the ports. Or, hey, if you ever buy a future Mac Studio or a future Mac Pro, if you have a display, right, you don't have to go out and buy a whole computer that has a display attached to it. So I feel like Apple's kind of recognized that, and they want it to get away maybe from making the iMac a Pro device. They want it to return it back to its roots. And with this Mac Studio now being out, with a Studio Display being out, with the 27-inch iMac being discontinued as of right now, I think that's kind of the vibe I'm feeling here. I feel like the idea of these pro-level iMacs, at least iMacs that get like a Ultra chip in it, I just don't see it happening in the immediate future. Apple obviously will revisit these things. I really do hope they do, because I think for me, the dream computer right now is kind of a M1 or an M2 Ultra iMac with a mini LED display. And if you can get that priced around $5,000 or lower, much like the iMac Pro, I actually think that would be a great value. I know it's expensive, but think about it. You're getting a really powerful computer combined with a 5K mini LED display, and I think that would just be a great workstation. But as of now, Apple is just shifting their priorities, and maybe rightfully so. Maybe this is what most Pro customers actually want, and now we're hearing rumors about them just expanding their display lineup even more. There's rumors of a 7K Pro display that might get like 120 hertz. There's even rumors of another 27-inch studio display coming out that would actually have mini LED instead of just a regular LCD panel. And right now it looks like Apple is making their desktop lineup, with the exception of this 24-inch iMac. They are focusing on desktop and then separate displays, and then you kind of pick and choose your perfect combination. And that does make me sad. I always loved those bigger iMacs. It's what I planned on buying before the Mac Studio came out. And yeah, I would be sad if they don't ever make another one quite like that, with that much power. So we will see in the end. This is just kind of speculation at this point. But yeah, those are the future Apple Silicon Macs we can expect, at least for the first half of this video. And then the question of the 27-inch iMac returning or a bigger iMac returning, I think it's certainly possible. I just don't know if it will return in the form that it was at. I think it will be more of a consumer level machine. But anyway, those are just my thoughts on it. Hope you enjoyed my thoughts. If you did, give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.